I love lists. I love year-end reviews. So we figured on this Illini Inquirer podcast, Joey Wagner and I, Jeremy Werner, would do a list review of the year 2021. I don't know, Joey. I got my Time magazine. It's got the top 10 movies of the year, books of the year, all that stuff. And I haven't read any of that stuff, but I'm a sucker for a list and kind of year in reviews. How about you? Do you get into those?
Not as much. I do wonder when you eventually go through this as a father of two who watches more Bluey than Hollywood like movies. I wonder how many of those top 10 movies you'll have actually seen. I'm guessing two would be a pretty high number, I would have to think.
You know how many movies I saw this year? One.
What was it?
Clifford the Big Red Dog.
Perfect. Yeah.
First movie I ever took my kids to. It was what you'd expect, right? From Clifford the Big Red Dog. The kids enjoyed it. They stayed through the movie, which was nice. So that was nice getting through the whole 90 minutes there. But yeah, I'm not a big Marvel guy. I understand how good they are, but so Spider-Man, I was not part of the $1 million gross there. And I'm still on 2020 music. I'm still listening to Bring Me the Horizon, Machine Gun Kelly, Mod Song, the pop punk revival here, Joey, is what I'm into. So we should have a top 10 pop punk songs of 2021 list.
I don't think I would be helpful in the revival of it because I still listen to the same. Look, we do a lot of driving. I need something I know and I can sing along to, and that just happens to be stuff when I was 17 or 18. Real quick, shout out to Clifford for that's some staying power, dude. That guy was popular when I was a kid. I'm 30. I also learned that Pokemon is still a thing. Huge staying power for them. That's not something I would have bargained for. I thought it got not cool in 2004, and sure enough, it's still hanging around. What a weird year, man.
Yeah, and for you guys who were Blues Clues growing up, that's kind of made a comeback.
Really?
It was really good. I missed that. I was a little older for Blues Clues, but my kids do like it. My daughter got a little notebook thing that she draws on and stuff that's like Blues Clues. So she's all into that. But we wanted to review the Illinois year 2021. And Joey, let's start here. We're going to talk about the best moments, best win, best athletes, right? The biggest storylines of this year. But how can we not start with the big picture of 2021 in that 2020, there were many athletes for Illinois, whether it's baseball and softball, their seasons got cut short, so they barely competed. Volleyball did not have a match in 2020, right? So many athletes that didn't even compete. And while obviously with Illinois basketball, both men and women on pause, the wrestling team went on pause, COVID testing continues. Things have let up at least this fall compared to the spring when it comes to some of those restrictions, but we are still living in this pandemic and there still are some things that aren't very normal, but we've had some huge returns to normalcy and just huge returns to just people competing on the field yet again. So we'll get into the NCAA and how much things have changed there, but just with athletes getting back on the field, fans being back in the stands, this has been a huge year of progress in that regards. And, the good thing is in March 2020, Joey, we had no idea what this would look like. How would this impact the health of student athletes? And so far it's been good, right? We haven't had any serious things happen here to student athletes, at least at Illinois and mostly throughout the country. So from where we were in 2020 to where we are now, certainly was a year of getting that hope back, getting some normalcy back in college athletics.
Yeah, man, it really does. I want to start back in March of 2020. Do you remember in the post-season, I guess, presser, the last in-person presser we had when the Big Ten tournament was canceled? Brad Underwood looked at us and said, "What are you guys going to write about and talk about on TV?" And we're like, "I don't know, man. I don't know. This is so strange." And it feels like forever since that moment. I mean, I remember you and I, Jeremy, were at Camp Randall to start the 2020 football season. We were in empty arenas and stadiums the whole time. That was still the most bizarre feeling I've ever felt at a sporting event, because that place is on fire, literally. I mean, the press box shakes. It is a party there, and you're looking around and it's just nothing. So coming back to this year and there's people there again and there's bands and things start to like, you almost forget. And I know that's not always like the right thing. And you shouldn't forget about where we're at and what's kind of surrounding us. But those Saturdays covering football, you almost kind of forgot that everything else was around. And maybe we lost a little bit of perspective about what it had all been to get back to that point. But you appreciated it a little more. I did. I appreciated seeing people at football games. I appreciated being at the Arizona game, the basketball game, and you look around and it felt like the Iowa game in 2019. And it's just this energy, and it's just stuff you took for granted that it was kind of hard. And then of course people get to play sports. Like you saying volleyball didn't play a match in 2020 blows my mind. Like that is insane.
A
I
whole
don't want to
calendar
say
year. Like, think of how many matches those girls play their entire lives, through club sports, all that. And then there's a whole calendar year they don't play. Like they just don't play a match. Like, and then this year they get 2 seasons in, right? It's kind of crazy, but it was just, I had to tell myself that, right? Like a lot of those sports, like had to get football, they had to get basketball in to start, but a lot of those sports, they weren't doing what they do for 9 to 12 months, which is just absolutely insane. And like, I just think for everybody, right? Like most of us are trying to do what's best for the collective, right? But like, we still want to do what we do. And like, that's what we found out, I think, this year is how can we do what we want to do responsibly, safely, all of this. And we got back to that. And there's just a mental health component of all of that, right? Like getting kids in school was like one of my main things. Like we got to get kids back in school. Like that has to be the priority more so than some of these other things, right? Like, and I think that was so important with these student athletes' mental health, with fans' mental health, like going to a game, watching games. Like it can be infuriating for people, but it's also an outlet for people, good or bad. It's an outlet. And for most people, it's a really good outlet, something they can cheer on. So I think everybody was in a better mental state with sports and college sports getting back.
yeah, man. And the COVID anxiety is a real thing too, right? I mean, you sit in your house all day, and not everybody, but some of us are, oh my God, is this a symptom? Oh my God, you just, it's almost eats your thoughts. So to go somewhere or to watch something and have your thought be somewhere else, and maybe you're screaming at the TV because you're upset about a punt in West Lafayette, or maybe you're in the stadium at Memorial Stadium and you're upset about a punt against Maryland. That feels like a trillion times better outcome than being hunkered at home watching Tiger King in March of 2020, right? I mean, just to kind of experience life again and see things coming in. And obviously the trickle down effect for kids to play sports. Like that's what they want to do. A lot of people tie their identity to playing a certain sport, and to get back to a lot of that, it felt good. And unfortunately, here we are on December 28th, and you're kind of reminded, we've all been kind of reminded in the last 2 weeks or so that, and I think you put it really well, like we're done with this pandemic, but it's not necessarily done with us. And it's a really true thing. And, the hope is, as we record this, right, men's and women's basketball are on pause for a TBD, I guess, amount of time. We don't really know when that's going to end, but it's still here. And it's almost felt like for a little bit like a vacation from August to December here of just kind of feeling that normalcy, but still around, and hopefully we continue to have a good grip on it. But it's really been kind of a long year. Like in your mind, you think of 2020,
Yeah.
but 2021's been kind of a lengthy year too, man.
Well, it's interesting because last fall you had a lot of some positive tests with Illinois football, and it impacted their season mostly because of contact tracing that we don't have, right? Like that's not a thing really anymore. But through the fall football, there were a couple interesting absences throughout the season that it was like, oh, is that COVID? And Illinois wouldn't say whether or not, but it wasn't like a whole offensive line is out,
The
right?
quarterback room.
Or the quarterback room has been impacted by this. So we didn't have that. And then now college basketball, and you're seeing it with college football with bowl teams, certainly being impacted by this again. And yeah, it is a reminder of where it is, but it's also evolving, right? Like the Big Ten had its forfeiture policy, and today they finally change it, but it's still really unclear, which this has not been a good 2 years for the Big Ten and the leadership of Kevin Warren, which I can sympathize with how and when he took over, but they just haven't been at the forefront of this and haven't been very, very decisive with many things that they've done here, which has been infuriating. But it's like, will Illinois have to forfeit one of these games? We're not quite sure how many athletes can they have available potentially for Sunday at Minnesota. Not sure. Would Minnesota just be like, yeah, you got to play because we can play? Or would Minnesota say, yeah, let's postpone this one and we'll make it up at a later date? I don't know if the Big Ten answered any of those things quite today, but it is a reminder that the pandemic is still going on. The good news is, Joey, we now have vaccines, right? We now have treatments, and most cases with these student athletes seem to be mild because it seems like almost all of them are vaccinated. And it seems like with the Omicron variant, at least the early data, and I hate going off of that sometimes, but the early data seems to be that this is starting to act, if you are vaccinated, more like a cold or a flu or something like that. So what's going to be interesting in 2022 is if somebody's test positive, are we still testing next year for this? Is this just the cold? Is this just the flu? Like, these are things I don't know the answers to, and I don't want to pretend, but like, we're going to have to learn how to deal with that. And I think that's what we're dealing with now, is the messy part of like, okay, these guys aren't really being impacted health-wise, might be asymptomatic. We don't know for Illinois basketball, but all these schools are dealing with that right now. Even Calipari said we're not testing for guys unless they're asymptomatic, right? Well, Illinois is testing for everybody. It's messy right now. So that's what 2022 is probably going to answer, is the year we learn to live with this and get back to probably what we knew in 2019, right?
You hope, yeah, we're in the in between right now, right? I think you still have this feeling that there's a lot going on in the world with regards to this pandemic, this virus, and you don't want to just turn your head from that because it's all real and it's all happening, and hospitals are full of people and numbers are going up, and all of that is very much a thing. But I think there's also, at least my read on it, is a look ahead. Like, look, we've got all this stuff, we've got these measures in place. Here's data of, if you're vaccinated, what this X, Y, and Z. Like, there's so many different things there that it's like, well, when do we turn the page as best we can? And the delicate balance of finding the time to do that. And is it going to take, like it did when the NBA shut down, where one league says this is going to be us? I mean, we're talking a sports realm now, not big,
Yeah.
life picture. Is it going to take one league to say, like, we'll do this because, here's the data we're using to drive this decision, much like the NBA did when they shut down? They said, we're done here. And then everybody else follows suit. Will it be another one of those, one sport, one league leads the way and everyone else follows? We don't know. And it's hard. That's been a hard part. I don't want to say the hardest part of these last, I guess almost 2 years, is like, we don't really know what to expect day to day, right? Like,
Right.
it's, for a while we kind of got used to what we were doing, and now as we evolve, it's hard to know what to expect the next way. So it's still weird. Like, it's still
It's still the
weird.
main story, right? Like, I know people they want to go talk sports. Well, this is a part of sports right now. It impacts everything we do in life, and certainly it is impacting sports. But I don't think you could talk about 2021, Joey, without talking about the biggest storyline is Illinois basketball. I know it didn't end the way everybody wanted to in the NCAA tournament, and that's a big part of this story, is the second round loss to Loyola, Chicago. But what a 2021 it was. And I remember you were doing your top 10 stories of 2021, which is going to publish on Wednesday morning. And is it the loss to Loyola? Do we go with like the negative? Because that is a lot of people going to be the number one thing they do remember from that season. But I kind of talked to you and I was like, man, I texted you the screenshot of the run from mid-January to mid-March, right? Where they won 15 of 16 games. They won a Big Ten tournament championship. I think they should have won at least a share of the Big Ten title, given that Michigan ducked 3 games. And I do think it was in part to win the Big Ten championship outright. And it's just, that is one of the best runs we've ever seen from an Illinois team. They were 9-5, 5-3, which is, they were going to make an NCAA tournament. You're thinking, maybe it's more of a 4 or 5 seed than a 1 seed. Then all of a sudden they go off and they're one of the best teams in the country heading into the NCAA tournament. Ayo Dosunmu has 2 triple doubles, right? Like Kofi Coburn is a consensus second team All-American. Ayo puts together one of the best seasons we've ever seen. From January 19th to March 20th, they lost 1 game. And it was one of the best runs we've ever seen from an Illinois basketball team. And to be honest with you, Joey, it's still like one of the best teams I've ever seen in Illinois history, despite that second round loss to Loyola Chicago. And they lived up to the hype of what the season was supposed to be outside of the NCAA tournament. They lived up to all the hype that Illinois fans thought they could be. And they just established themselves that Illinois basketball is potentially a national player, but certainly back-to-back years, one of the best teams in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I thought, and I wrote this, Jeremy. I think 2020 was like, we're back, right? Like that was Illinois basketball's reemergence onto the national scene. And unfortunately, that didn't get to be seen all the way through because the tournament got canceled. But 2021 felt like a staying power voice, right? Like, yeah, we're back. You guys all knew we're back, but we're not really planning on going anywhere. And oh, by the way, we're going to just knock off this unbelievable run from January 19th through Loyola. And this wasn't just beating Nebraska 15 out of 16 times. And I'm sorry, Nebraska, but you stink. You've been at the bottom of the Big Ten forever.
Hey, they give them a run in overtime.
Yeah, good for them.
Iowa had to save the day.
They beat Iowa. They beat Wisconsin. They lost to Michigan State. That was the Iowa got clobbered and really kind of threatened. Like, what a weird feeling after that, right? Like, it's like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? They go to Wisconsin. They win at Wisconsin. I think the signature win of the season was at Michigan, just beating the brakes off of the Wolverines without Iowa. Then they go to Ohio State and they win there. And for good measure, they beat Iowa and Ohio State again in the Big Ten tournament. And it's like, wow, this isn't just like a lucky schedule break where you're playing the bottom of the conference. You're not. Now, there were some bottom feeders in there, right? I mean, Northwestern, Nebraska, I mean, Indiana, I wouldn't call them a bottom feeder, but they weren't great. Penn State in the same way, Rutgers. But those were some pretty sizable wins. And that's where you just felt like, sometimes when a team is quote unquote back, you can be like, oh, okay, well, is that a fluke? Like, are they back now because they have Ayo Dosunmu and obviously Kofi Coburn, and you look around and what Brad had on that 2020 team, 2019-20 team. But then you come back and it's like, nah, man, this is just kind of what we think we're going to expect. Now, you and I have talked in 2022, that's going to be challenged a little bit with what we think is going to happen with the roster, just purely by people, Trent Frazier, Devontae Williams, who will be gone. But it just felt like that was Brad just reaching a floor. It felt like 2021 was like, our floor is going to be at minimum a top half Big Ten team. We're going to be probably pretty firmly in the tournament. There's going to be some years where it varies, right? Like that happens to everybody basically. But it just felt like that was Brad saying, this is at least where I think we're going to be every year. And 2021 backed it up.
Yeah, and you and I were kind of going through before we got on here of like just trying to remember the moments of this season. And in the non-conference, it was, oh, Jason Preston almost beat you in Ohio before Iowa saved the day late in that one. The Duke win was so big, but you followed that with a loss to Missouri. So it just didn't feel like it lasted, right? And then you crush Minnesota in the opener and you lose to Rutgers. And then you win 4 games in a row, but then you lose back-to-back when you finally get tested by some of these top teams, Maryland and Ohio State. But then it started that run, right? You get Penn State at home, you beat Iowa at home, kind of reestablish yourself, beating Luka Garza. And I believe Iowa was top 10 at that point of the season. 7. Yeah. Indiana overtime victory. I don't know if we talk about that one enough. Iowa had a bad game. He fouled out, and Trent Frazier hit a huge couple threes back to back to tie that game. And then everyone just struggled to score the rest of that game. But Illinois got to the free throw line. Curbelo, Frazier made some big free throws. Curbelo had an awesome pass to Kofi for a big dunk. And it was just like, oh, this team, even without Iowa, can win on. I know it's a different experience on the road last year, but they won on the road. They clobber Wisconsin at home. Nebraska, they get that scare, but Iowa bails them out. beat a couple teams they should, Northwestern, Minnesota. They lose that one to Michigan State, and Io gets hurt. And for the second straight year, you're thinking, oh, this year could be messed up by an Io DeSumo injury. And then you just go on and win 3 games without him, including at Wisconsin and at Michigan, the number 2 team in the country, I believe, at that time. And you just clobber them, just absolutely run them off the floor. And then Iowa comes back and you're able to beat Ohio State. And Iowa had a fantastic game there. And then the Big Ten tournament happens with that masked man. It was just going back through some of those. You got to remind yourself, especially me with the Indiana overtime game, just how big that one was in the season. But it was just a hell of a ride. And I think that was the story of the season, was that 15 of 16 streak.
Let's go back to before it started. I remember exactly where we were sitting in, I guess, the Crush Club, right? That's where we recorded podcasts last year, after back-to-back losses in 7 days to Maryland and Ohio State, both at home. And we were like, what in the world is going on here? Like, this is not what we thought we were going to be covering or what we were going to be seeing or what this team was going to be. I remember distinctly, we wondered who was going to be the third, who was going to be next to Io, next to Kofi in terms of leading this team.
Do you remember the podcast title? I just looked it up.
No, what was it?
A Liddell disappointing.
I mean, I feel like we felt
Liddell disappointing. That was a nice. I thought that was a nice play on words there.
Yeah, but I remember talking. I feel like we felt good about that name.
Yeah, I felt really good about that title. But it was like, yeah, this team's a little disappointing at this point. But that's why, even when they started 2-2s, like, okay, we've seen this before, right? Like, I'm not going to make these grand proclamations before they really get into a stretch run and before, they get tested a little bit. For whatever reason, this team, the team last year, it feels like they're better being the hunter than the hunted.
Yeah, Brad had to still, every year about this time, Brad is in his lab crafting and manufacturing a chip to put on his team's shoulders and some sort of slight that maybe happened or maybe didn't happen in the exact way that we read it. Brad's a master at that. Like, that's not a knock. Brad knows exactly.
It's like when you hear all these Alabama kids saying, like, nobody ever believed in me. Bryce Young, I was the number 2 recruit in the country, not number 1. Nobody believed I could do this. Or you hear Will Anderson say, yeah, nobody thought we could do this. Like, you're freaking Bama. Yeah, of course we did. You were number 1.
They're the underdogs against Cincinnati, don't you know?
Yeah.
Like, but that's what Brad is so good at. And like, I know for point last year during that stretch, we kind of rolled our eyes because we heard a lot of those chips, everyone against us type thing. And Brad is so good at, like, either manufacturing it or finding it or blowing a little moment into that and then just not letting them forget it. We did it a little bit this year with Coleman Hawkins against Ron Harper. Remember, like, he's been like twisting that knife since last year in New Jersey. And that it's just that thing. And so I think when I look at that ride, that 15 of 16, I just have to remember how it started. And we were just wondering, it was kind of a crossroads a little bit. And maybe it was a little overreaction. And maybe it's because we thought this team was going to be pretty much what they ended up being. They probably ended up being better than I think a lot of us thought. And you're like, oh God, what in the world? And then they just do it. And it was, you kind of get lost. Like, when we talked about, I'm like, 15 of 16, really? Is that right? Like, am I reading this right? Am I remembering this right? It was that. And it was just, then you think back of, like, what we missed by not having people there to watch it. And like that's kind of just that little nugget that eats a little bit. But dude, it was something. And yeah, the Loyola loss, that stunk for them. Like, that, it stunk because it was an in-state school from the Missouri Valley. And that's probably not giving all the right context that was required when discussing that Loyola team.
Top 10 Ken. Yeah.
Yeah. But it happened. And it happened in the second round. And you didn't get that week of buzz between the second round and the Sweet 16, where you're the darlings and you're the number 1 seed and you're all of this, and everybody wants to talk to Brad, and everywhere you turn, it's, oh, there's Io, there's Kofi, there's Brad, and it's all of this, like, just constantly in it. You miss that. And of course, you obviously miss the Sweet 16 and you miss any chance of going any further, but that's what's fun about that week between those first, the 2 rounds in Sweet 16 is just, it's so much. Yep. And it's all the time, and that didn't happen. And credit to Loyola, but also Illinois just kind of fell, right? They just fell flat.
I think you have 5 of your top 10 stories are Illinois basketball related. I think 4 of the top 5 are Illinois and I agree with it. The other part of this is what happened after all of that, right? Is Ayo Dosunmu leaves and goes pro, as everyone expected him to do probably 2 years ago. And he gets drafted by the Chicago Bulls, which is fantastic. But the whole Kofi Cockburn thing, like there was points where you thought Kofi Cockburn was going pro. He obviously thought he was going pro with selling gear and serving the NCAA suspension. There's also a moment where he thought he might be going to Kentucky, right? Like, and the reason you thought he might be going to Kentucky is because Orlando Antigua and Chin Coleman are at Kentucky, and Stephen Gentry is at Gonzaga. You lost an entire staff. There was a point this summer, Joey, where we're thinking this team might be fighting for an NCAA tournament berth this year, not a Big Ten title. And then all of a sudden, Kofi comes back. You add Alfonso Plummer, you add Omar Payne, who obviously has not had a huge impact, but Alfonso Plummer is just raining fire on people right now from the perimeter and one of the best scorers in the NCAA right now. So everything that happened after that is also like the huge storyline of that. Brad Underwood didn't let this fall apart. Like Kofi Cockburn came back because he trusted Brad Underwood. He wanted to make some money. We didn't mention NIL and transfers and all this stuff in our big picture stuff, but like all of that played a role in Brad Underwood having another team that we think can compete for a Big Ten title, a third year in a row of doing that, but also be a potential top 4 or 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. And maybe for the first time since 2005 for Illinois, for the first time in Brad Underwood's career as a head coach, potentially get to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. And I think that Loyola loss will linger until whenever Brad Underwood is able to get to that second weekend.
Yeah, the Kofi thing was so interesting because it's like July 1st. That was like the calendar of the new terrain of college sports, right? Like NIL is the thing, and we're all like, okay, wow, how's this impact? And then Kofi goes in the portal, and then it's just like everything is just a total confusing mess a little bit.
Our message board from April to when it was the Antigua rumors started, right? From April until Kofi came back, we're just on fire. That was a fun place to be, Joey, I say sarcastically.
Hey man, shout out to everybody for sticking around and dealing with that. But like, you know, the running joke is like, if you watch like nationally or see what happens, is like, oh, just another day on the Louisville basketball beat, because it always seems like there's just been some like firework thrown into the program like every other day. That's what the offseason felt like. Yeah. Like, you know, we had kind of heard the rumors of Orlando Antigua, and then, okay, is Chin going too? Chin Coleman? All right, what's going on? Wait, is Illinois going to keep Orlando? You know, Josh Whitman rolls up with a Brinks truck and
Adam Miller, the heir apparent to Iowa.
Oh my God.
That's heads are falling off. Like
it's yeah. Oh, there's going to be a group of people I hope get that, but they probably won't. But yeah, man, it's like all of this is happening as fans are still, and probably Brad Underwood are still trying to reconcile with this way too early loss in the NCAA tournament that did not sit well with anybody. And then your ballyhooed recruit from Chicago enters the portal. You lose all 3 assistant coaches, every last one of the on-court ones, which is not the best headline to have nationally, by the way. And then Kofi's in the portal, and then he's not, and then it's insane. It was really like, yeah, a lot of the top 10 stories are going to be Illinois basketball related, and you could have made a legitimate argument to do like 8 or 9 of them, because it was such a wild calendar year for that program. And then, oh, by the way, we expect they're going to play basketball again, and they're going to be pretty good again. It's wow.
Yeah, and then Andre Curbelo injury on top of it is probably was one towards the end of this, probably an honorable mention that, you know, there's mystery around it, right? We don't know when he's coming back, and they're still pretty good without him. But if you add him, and just watching some of the Indiana game highlights and some of the season highlights again, it's like some people should go back and watch some of those things about Andre Curbelo, because yeah, they're better with him on the court. And hopefully they can get him back. Some other things I wanted to mention. Men's golf, another great year. We almost overlook it, but what Mike Small does to do this every year, 11 out of 12 Big Ten championships. They make a run to the Elite Eight again, the match play, lose to Oklahoma, which I think was the number 1 team or number 2 team in the country, but they were the 4 seed because of stroke play. But Michael Fiegel's great super senior season. Adrian DeMont DeChasser wins co-Big Ten Player of the Year, and Fiegel's had an argument for it. Jerry G really stepped up. So really good team yet again, and they continue to chase that elusive title. I thought men's tennis winning a Big Ten tournament title was a huge story, especially with all the super seniors they had back. Ohio State's like the one hurdle they just can't get over. And this year they got over it. They're the only team that can beat Ohio State in the Big Ten tournament championship the last, 12 years. Illinois has done it 3 times. And then volleyball, you're kind of wondering mid-season, like, all right, where's this Chris Thomas program going? And they do well in the Big Ten. The Big Ten's absolutely loaded. They had the championship match was between 2 Big Ten teams. But they make the run to the Sweet 16. They knock off Kentucky, and it was a really successful season for them, and one that I think Chris Thomas can certainly build on. So I wanted to mention a couple of those things. Olivia Howell making the NCAA championships as a freshman in the 1500, really good as well. So some other really good performances, Joey.
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty good year for Illinois non-revenue sports, right? I mean, golf is such a like, ho hum, okay, there goes Mike Small winning the Big Ten again. And oh, what's that? He found another number 1 golfer. Oh, okay. And like, I don't mean to like take anything away because it's really impressive, but it's just where this program is. You just look at it, it's the expectation. And that doesn't make the result any less impressive. It's just like, oh, wow, like, yeah, they've done it again. And, it's when you look at the whole body of work, it's really something else. And that tennis run, I mean, that was in the summer, right? It's kind of early summer, and things wasn't really a lot going on. And that was a really big deal. It would have been a big deal if there was a lot going on. But that was the non-revenue, save for, baseball, softball, missed the tournament, right? Women's basketball is still struggling. I mean, there's really no
that is a story is women's basketball with Nancy Faye. I mean, this is their third staff basically that she's had reset, and the results are not coming. Like, listen, I get it. She's a Hall of Fame coach. It's not working. It's just not working. So I think for 2022, that's a huge storyline. Yeah, baseball, softball, they always seem like they're on the edge of, are they going to get in the tournament? Are they not? And last year was so weird with some of those sports, Joey, because it was conference only, right? Even volleyball last spring, they were 7-11, but it was all in the Big Ten. So it's really hard to judge compared to a normal year. And even wrestling, right? But another big storyline is wrestling making a coaching change, staying in-house with Mike Poeta. But I do think that program needed a jolt of energy. Jim Heffernan, lifer really here at Illinois. But I feel like they needed a jolt of energy, and they went with a youth guy in Mike Poeta. And I think he's really energized recruiting. And we'll see what they can do on the mat. But I do think for the long term, maybe you can get them a little bit more excited, but that's more of a long-term answer.
Yeah, and I was glad you brought up Olivia Howe because she's really, really good at what she does. And I know sometimes women's track, it's in those summer or early summer months, it is really when those championships happen. It's easy to overlook men's and women's track. They're long days to go out there and watch some of those. But man, she is really exceptional at what she does, and she's a good cross-country runner as well. And I think you're going to hear a lot more about her because of how good she is. Like, she could be that person for this program to just really band her. And then you put NIL in the mix, and there's just a lot there for her. And I know your athletes of the year, Jeremy, you mentioned Manning Platter, a guy that Illinois native, got him from Michigan. And it was a transfer that just paid off for everybody right away. Right. And he won some awards, and he did really well at Illinois. It's just those things that, I understand they're so easy to kind of get sucked into the football and basketball mold and just really live kind of in those spheres. But there's a lot going on outside of that. Now, there's a lot not going on, as we talked about with women's basketball, but some of those non-revenue, especially those spring ones, just really continue to just do incredibly well for themselves.
Yeah. All right, Joey. I was thinking about who made the biggest impact on
Wait, can we talk about football?
Yeah, that's where I want.
Probably should talk about football.
Who made the biggest impact on Illinois? And you could say Kofi for coming back. You could say Io for coming back and playing the 3 months that he did here for Illinois. You could talk about Brad Underwood, right? Or you could just go at the top and go Josh Whitman, which I think he's always got his handprints over everything. But I think it's clearly Brett Bielema. right? Who's just brought, I don't know if I want to use the word energy again, but he's just brought a steadying hand, I feel like, to Illinois football. Um, he's really bought into, I think, the role that Lovie Smith never did, which is the face and voice of Illinois athletics, right? And Josh Whitman certainly is that. Brad Underwood certainly can be, but football, your football coach has to be out there. Your football coach has to be selling not only your football program, but your athletics program, your community, your university. And Brett Bielema gets that. And it certainly doesn't matter if you go 2-10, right? But he certainly made an impact on the football program as well. But I just think as a CEO, he's certainly been an improvement for Illinois football and everything that job entails. From the moment he put together a staff, and Tony Peterson, you and I had questions about when he made that hire, right? Like, and we'll see how that works out. But when he put together the rest of the staff, it's like, oh, he's getting some guys from other Power 5 schools, whether it's Aaron Henry or Terrence Jameson, or and then he ends it with George McDonald and Kevin Kane and Ryan Walters, and you're thinking, whoa, okay, this looks like a staff, and I've said it many times, that Iowa would be happy with, that Michigan could be happy with. And he put that together compared to the hires we were seeing with Lovie Smith, right? Especially early on, they're all NFL guys, didn't work out. And then he's starting to pick guys that don't seemingly qualify for the Illinois jobs. And those guys are your assistant head coach or assistant coaches. And then you start to see players coming back. Jake Hansen coming back, Owen Carney coming back, Casey Washington coming back, all these super seniors buying into him. And then you see the Nebraska win, and then you have a bunch of struggles, but then to see that team build upon what they did late in the season with some signature wins, getting to 5-7, which felt a heck of a lot better than 3-9 or 4-8. And then to see just the recruiting effort, right. And connecting with some in-state prospects. And I just think you feel better about where Illinois football is at, knowing they need to do a lot more to compete in the Big Ten, but in the Big Ten West, you feel like you have a chance now.
Yeah, let's start with the off the field stuff. And you talked about him being a CEO, and it's something he embraces, whether it's every radio hit he can get his hands on, or every sit down. I sat down with him last week. I know other outlets did too. Those things matter, especially when you're trying to rebuild a program. Like, you don't have to do that if you're at Alabama. You don't have to talk to everybody who will listen, because Alabama football is going to have excitement because it's Alabama football, right? But you're right, where as good as Brad Underwood is, and everybody, I still think a lot of people would argue like, oh, Illinois is a basketball school, because the success dictates basically just that. It's still something about the head football coach really drives a lot. There's a reason people joke, I think we're all joking when we say this, that Nick Saban could be the governor of Alabama, or that Ryan Day the same in Ohio, or Dabo the same in South Carolina, because those voices, like, that's just kind of all what it means. And Illinois had been lacking that. Honestly, Pat Fitzgerald had that, I guess you could say, title in the state of Illinois. And you could really reasonably make an argument he still does. I mean, Northwestern was down, but still good. It's minimally more competitive to which voice rings out the loudest in the state, which you could not say a year ago or before that. So what Brett's done, and just in terms of embracing all that it is, and he still has a tough hill to climb on the field, and he did certainly a year ago, Jeremy, when he got hired. But a year ago, looking back, does it not seem like a tall task to try to make people excited about this program?
Yeah.
Like, if you were a fan, I don't want to take a pot shot, but I sure will here in a minute. Like, what were you excited about after watching this team in the last 3 years? I mean, there were some pieces. I don't want to say like there's nothing there to build around, but like, big picture,
there was a 4-game stretch that made you really excited. There was about a year there where you're excited about recruiting with Marquez Beast and Isaiah Williams, Shimon Cooper. Sure. But it felt so flimsy. It all felt a little flimsy at the time. Like the transfers, right? Like all of a sudden you start hitting in the transfer portal. You did 1 year, and then could you keep it up, right? Like, and that's what this feels more sustainable, right? And that is the word that Illinois is looking for, is sustainable. and seeing Illinois, even in one season, Joey, sustain competitiveness, right? Like there were two games you felt like you couldn't win, Virginia and Wisconsin, right? The rest of them, yeah, they were frustrating that you lost against Purdue and Maryland, and you're not able to get more wins than that, but like you had a chance, and ruining some of the decisions or some of those plays. Like usually it's Illinois fans leaving in the third quarter, right? Like being like, we didn't even have a chance. Like we're not even in the same realm. When it comes to the Big Ten West, this year is going to be tough as you reset this thing and you lose a bunch of experience, but you don't feel like you're that far off from what those teams are. And you feel like you have a guy that comes with some credibility, and given the recruiting results he has, especially with players you feel like you should win, feels like you can make some hay in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I wanted to liken it, and I know you're going to get mad at me for saying this, to being a Bears fan right now. Like you just feel by the end of
last. No, I don't feel mad at you for saying the truth, Joey. I know.
Well, did you? I mean, just maybe a little rudderless, right? That was maybe how it felt before Brett got to Illinois. Is like, well, where's this going here? How's this all going to look? What do they have? And I know the Bears have Justin Fields, and that's good for them objectively, but it's kind of like what you were just saying. It's like you got to get a coach to come in there and make you feel energized. And I think Brett, beyond the on-field competitiveness, I just feel like he's done that. And yes, he's got to win more. No, he wasn't happy that he was giving an end of the season press conference when he should have been prepping for a bowl game. Like he's not going to stand up and say, well, would you look at this 5-7 record, huh? Like, glad we're here. Like that's like not
CBS graded the season. I thought that it was a perfect grade, C+, right? Which is like for Illinois, there's a little bit of a curve there. Like most teams aren't going to get a C+ for 5-7, but like for Illinois, like, yeah, like there was improvement there. It was satisfactory because I predicted 5-7, but there are also regrettable moments there. But that's because you were competitive in those games and had chances to make an even bigger statement. And you have a huge missed opportunity here, right? Like if you could have finished higher in the Big Ten West standings, what does that do for recruiting? If you could have gotten 15 bowl practice in, don't know if you got a bowl game in, right? Because everything going on, but like that would have been huge for the development of your program to have basically an extra spring ball.
Yeah. So I mean, no, I don't think any of us who look at this or paid to look at this rationally are like, all right, what a year. I mean, Brett doesn't want to be 5-7 again. Fans don't want them to be 5-7 again. That much is very much true. But just kind of
5-7 for 2022 right now, though.
Yes. Now, if you look at the schedule, yes. Look, it's a whole nother topic. But the point. I mean, the point is, you can see. I think as we covered Brett for a year, is you see he's very process driven, and to me, just from what we see on the outside and people we talk to and understanding how this comes, that process feels sound. It feels like that's a process that's going to yield some sort of results. Now, how big of a jump in those results over what it has been, we don't know. I mean, there's still a lot that you have to coach into these players. There's still a lot you have to have go right. Injuries are a part of that. There's a lot that goes in, but the process feels like something that could at least lead to the hope of sustainability. And I think that is what my biggest takeaway from his year one was you just see kind of the outlines and the shell and how they want to do it. And that looks like a good mix to me.
Yeah. The process is not perfect, but it's sound, right? Like I think that's correct. Like the transfer portal, they didn't do that well last year, right? They didn't get a lot of bang for their buck in the transfer portal. Like some of the guys were pretty good. Jack Badovanak ended up being a pretty good player for them, but they didn't hit the way they need to, at least this year, right? With how much they're going to replace. So some of those things need to improve. The offense certainly was not a positive until very late in the season when Brandon Peters played better ball and the offensive line protected better. And I just think Tony Peterson called better games late in the season. So they certainly have things they got to clean up, but the hashtag Illini problem certainly seemed like better problems to have. Like, God, fourth down call at Purdue, like is as frustrating as it is that this is still the case. Like that's an improvement for Illinois football. Now it's, can you build on those things? And we'll see that going into next year. All right. What was the best win of the year, Joey? Got a couple candidates on the top of my mind. I'll go with one that I think just because the improbability of it, going into Ann Arbor and defeating Michigan by 20 plus points without Io DeSumo, with Michigan basically already claiming the Big Ten title. That was a statement. That was a statement win. And Trent Frazier played amazing. I mean, basically everybody played amazingly in that game, but that felt like the major win of the year, even understanding what Illinois did at Penn State.
Yeah, man, I wish I would have gone first so I could have put you on the spot to pick a different one. But yeah, like that was the one for me. Like we've got so many like images of that too. Like that's what kind of sticks out, like beyond just what it means on the floor, is like the images that come out, like meaning the celebration was like they knew what they had done. And whether it's Andre Curbelo,
Trent Frazier with the big champs. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still thinking when Ubbins renovated that might be somewhere on a wall, or Andre Curbelo jumping into Brad's arms. And now 5 years, I can safely say I've seen that one time when someone jumps into Brad's arms. Like that was a really, really big deal. And I think they were probably kind of ticked off that Michigan had seemingly awarded themselves a Big Ten championship, and no one thought they were going to win that, right? I mean, which is crazy to say about a team that won 15 of 16 down the stretch, but like that just didn't feel like a game that we thought they were going to win. They went in and do it. So I feel like if that's taken, regrettably taken,
you can pick that one too. We can pick the same game. I mean,
well, no. Ohio State in the Big Ten tournament was big because that was like you beat Iowa. Ohio State played its butts off, and that was a really hard game in overtime. You needed Georgie to come through and do Georgie things. Like that was a really big game. It gets you a 1 seed. I mean, that was huge. It was
can we talk about how great Dwayne Washington was in that game? Like you shouldn't have lost that, or you shouldn't have won that game against what Dwayne Washington was doing in that tournament. And we know how good EJ Liddell is. Like that was a really great Ohio State team that was fighting for a 1 seed, right? Like they ended up getting the 2 seed, losing the first round, but that was an epic game between two really good teams that ended up having really disappointing ends of the season. Justice Suing, EJ Liddell, CJ Walker had a great performance in that one, but Illinois had 6 guys in double figures. Curbelo came, and DeMonte Williams had some big shots in that one too.
Yeah, that one, as we now talk about it, probably I maybe overlooked that a little bit, and I talk about the reactions we get. That was the amazing game. If you'll remember the Georgie and Kofi's 25-minute stand-up comedy tour via Zoom. But Penn State was a really big one for football, Jeremy, to go in a game that I remember doing the pregame show with Brett Behrens at WCIA. And we're like, hey, I don't know, man, just stay within 30 if you could maybe swing that. That's just what it felt like, because Penn State, frankly, probably would have been like the number 2 team in the country at that time had, man, why am I blanking on the quarterback's name?
Clifford. Yeah, Sean Clifford.
Sean Clifford not gotten hurt at Iowa. You can make an argument they win that game. So now Illinois goes into Penn State. Penn State had a bye. Clifford was back. I mean, the whole thing. And Illinois, by the way, had just gotten run over. I mean, like literally run over. One of 2 times they got blown out. They got blown out at home against Wisconsin and had no hope in the world of stopping the run. And you're like, oh my God, you're 2-5. You have all these super seniors who came back, and it's like, this is going not even at all what like you thought it was going to look like. Go ahead.
And Brett Bielema was getting reamed that.
Oh my God. Yes.
For the viral comment that we understood. And I think even some communications experts, like we know this, would say, hey, you probably could have said that a little bit better, added some context, knowing that this could go, out there to everybody. Still, like that was that week leading up to it. It's feeling like, man, where's this all? This season could get bad. You're going to Penn State right now, top 10 team. I don't feel like they're going to compete. And then they just owned the line of scrimmage, Joey. Just owned it. And they still had to go into overtime to beat. Like they should have won by
9 of them.
Yeah, they should have gone. They should have won by 2 scores if their passing game could have done anything. But Chase Brown, monster day. They run for 300 plus yards. We'll always remember it for being the barge day. I don't know if we'll get the barge ever to be a thing again after that, but it was fun to write about it for a week. But it was just, it turned around the season, right? Like that gave them belief when they went out there. And for whatever reason, this team, outside of that Northwestern game, maybe the Nebraska game, they played better on the road.
Yeah, they did. And don't overlook Josh McCray, a true freshman going into Penn State and running all over them. And then there's just so many things built in, right? Like Brandon Peters, for basically all intents and purposes, was benched going into that game. Art Stakowski breaks his arm. Brandon Peters has got, like, I wondered at the time, I'm like, are they going to put Peters in? I mean, is this like a Ryan Johnson moment? There's a lot that we didn't really know. And Brandon Peters goes in, and after some ugly 2-yard failures here and there, he throws this pass to Casey Washington, who was all but gone, by the way, a few months before that, to Wake Forest. He was in Wake Forest rather. So there's just a lot there, Jeremy, that
And we
really.
mentioned the offense. Sorry, Joe. We mentioned the defense was unbelievable that day. Like Kalen Tolson and Tariq Barnes probably had their best games ever. Defensive line owned the line of scrimmage. The safeties played well. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and you said, we don't know if we'll see the Barge again. Hear me out. The year is 2023. Joey Hokla, Hunter Whiteneck, Magnus Moeller are lined up in some capacity. Obviously, we think Hunter and Magnus, excuse me, might be on the other sides of each other, but those three seem like a pretty good base to get a Barge formation back together. Just as soon as you think everybody forgets about it, but dude, that was a big one, because if they lose that, now granted they come home and lay an egg to Rutgers and really kind of collapse the Bull hope at that point, because they really could only afford it to go 4-1 down the stretch.
Yeah, unlike the 2019 team, they didn't go back to back, right? Like that Rutgers game felt like the Purdue game of 2019, where it's like, all right, you win this one, all of a sudden, let's talk Bull. Let's talk about the Bull. Obviously, they follow it up with a win at Minnesota. It makes you start thinking that again. But yeah, that was a disappointing loss following it. But certainly that win fed into the win at Minnesota, and that fed into competing at Iowa, where they take a 10-0 lead. And Iowa was just better than them, but and then crushing a bad Northwestern team.
Yeah, I do wonder. There's always that part of me that wonders what happens if things go to chalk, right, at Penn State, and Illinois loses the game that on paper they should have lost. What follows from there? I mean, the Rutgers obviously doesn't matter. They lost that anyway, but do you have the confidence to go to Minnesota? And like, Minnesota wasn't a world beater by any stretch of the imagination, but like, it's not necessarily the easiest place to go in and win. And they were a pretty solid team. What happens then? So we don't know. I mean, I guess my order of operations would be Michigan basketball, probably Penn State football, and then I'd have to say Ohio State basketball in the Big Ten tournament title game, because I just felt like that. One, you got your banner in that game, right? And I know Illinois feels a little quite slighted by not getting one for the regular season. We just solidified, like,
Yeah.
hey, we're here. And now that didn't last. Those good vibes didn't last but 7 days, but that was a big one, man.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. All right, best moment. I told you before this, my best moment's kind of also the worst moment. After that Ohio State win, for me, it was the best moment. I just remember seeing Io DeSumo at the top of his ladder, right, going up to get his part of the net, and you just see him smiling, and then he points to this big screen, and you see Illinois come up as a number 1 seed. And it was just a great moment of just like Io realizing and fulfilling everything that people thought he could do. Like, he took on this weight that Illinois basketball, whether it was Jalen Brunson or Jawan Evans, or you name the recruit, right? Cliff Alexander, they're looking for the savior to turn them around, the one guy to believe in them and turn them around. And it always felt unfair, right? But Io always took that on. And here he is on his throne, this ladder. I don't know if it was a Werner, but it was a ladder. And he's going up there and he claims his net and he's pointing up to the screen and everybody turns. It's just like Io has his power, right? He's pointing, you look where Io was pointing. And we didn't even know it was on, that the selection show was even starting or it was on. And there's Illinois' number 1 seed. So that was my best moment, but it's also my worst moment because they didn't get any chance to enjoy it. Like it felt like there needed to be an hour there where they get to celebrate that. They get together as a team, and then you could focus on who you're playing next. And it was just like, it just happened so quick. And in the Big Ten, you love that stage, right? Right before the selection show, everybody's watching the end of that game. It was a classic in overtime. Everyone's starting to pick Illinois right after that point to go to the Final Four. Like every expert was picking them. But also for me, just felt like I always remembered it because it just felt so fleeting. Like there was no buildup to, are they going to be a 1 seed? Like we're going to see in like 20 minutes whether it is. And it just felt like Illinois was still kind of celebrating after they got to the NCAA tournament, right? Like, and it felt like Loyola Chicago was already reared and ready to go because they had a day after winning the Missouri Valley, or a couple of days after, a week probably, to get ready for their opponents. It just felt like Illinois was still in this celebration mode. So, like, I don't know if Illinois feels differently or they play differently against Loyola Chicago if they lose to Ohio State or if they lost to Iowa in the second round. But it's always something I'll wonder because they were still celebrating as the NCAA tournament show was going out.
Yeah, can we just say, I hope that the three of us can always be at all those big moments moving forward. I was back, so I missed a lot of that exchange. You see pictures of it, right? It's a good one, man. That's a really, really good one. And I think if we're doing this, they all have to be basketball, right? If you look at best moments, I mean, you could look at Zeke Clark outlasting in the men's tennis final against Ohio State. That was a freaking grind. I think Brad Dancer's like, yeah, Disney would be a part of this, right? Like that was a really big moment. But basketball was just so captivating, and I'm torn between two. I'm torn between the Curbelo jump because it just kind of felt a little bit like and I know it's not gone that way this year, and there's still more seasonal, but a little bit of like a transition of power from Io to the next guard as Curbelo kind of embraces this coach who got it all out of him at that point and was getting it all out of him. That was a really big one. You do it on the road, and that was just kind of felt like Curbelo stepping up into this, hey, things will be okay. Like everyone's going to miss Io, and you should. But like Io didn't play that game, and Curbelo just kind of steps into this role as a guard, and you see a little bit about what that team could be for the next month or so of the season, probably less than that, 3 weeks. And then again, like then that was a game I think we talked about when we were kind of trying to project what we thought Andre Curbelo could be coming into this basketball season. But I also go back, and maybe I just got caught up in what fun it was to cover this rivalry. And I feel bad even saying this, but like Io dunking on Patrick McCaffrey in the Big Ten tournament, because it's like he knew, like Io really got the moments. Like that was something that I don't know how he was always so sound in all of that, but he always just seemed to understand what they were immediately as they were happening. And he goes down, and he's patting his head, I just dunked on you. And they didn't like each other. They didn't like Iowa. Iowa didn't like Illinois. And in the way that you said, when Io points, everyone looks. When Io did anything, everyone looked. So when Io's celebrating that, I think it kind of was like a message to everybody, like, I know what in the world I just did. I understand what that means to you guys. And it was a really nice cap on what had been a fun 2-year rivalry between these two teams, and with Io and Luca and DeMonte and the McCaffreys and Jordan Bohannon. And it had all of that in there. It just kind of felt like him, like he had fun. Like to your point, and we know Io had a lot of fun, but like I would assume it has to be heavy wearing the crown of building Illinois basketball back up as a player. And to your point, he did it so well, so seamlessly. He didn't shy away from it. And that to me just kind of felt like he was like, all right, I did this. This was really, really fun to do. And I'm going to have a heck of a lot of fun doing it. And maybe at that point you thought, like, how's this team going to lose in the Big Ten tournament? Like they just had all of that going, and Ohio State obviously pushed them to the brink. But those two stand out to me just because it felt like there was more than just, it's in the same way as yours, just there was more than that just game moment.
All right. Worst moment, Joey, was a phone call you gave me. You're down in Florida, excited to do a story, that you lined up and we had talked about for a really long time. And you gave me the call that, you showed up to Bobby Rountree's session for therapy and he wasn't there, man. And I remember I was at Marianne's when you called me, and I had to leave right after that and kind of reach out to everybody. It's part of the job I hate. I remember getting the call or a message about Bobby Roundtree having a serious accident, having to work and cover that, and feeling for his family through all of that. And man, you were down there like down there, but you also did a heck of a job. Like the story I'm most proud you've ever written is the one talking to all those people at his therapy center, because it just gave the light of what he brought there, the energy he brought there. I mean, when he was alive, man, he was alive. And it's just a terrible tragedy, obviously, the last couple of years of his life, but he also inspired a lot of people. And he clearly made a big impact on everybody he touched.
He did. And, you know, a lot of people like this job, like it's so weird you say that, because like before we recorded this, we were looking like, okay, maybe I forgot a little bit about this game or this game. And like, even if you're like consumed in these and you're writing about it and you're covering it, they just all kind of blend as one game after a while. But like those phone calls, you don't necessarily ever forget. And I had to call someone to confirm it. And you just heard the voice on the other end break. And I called Dele Harding. And Dele text, he didn't answer. He texted me. He said, I have to give you a call back. I was like, I don't want to have to ask you this, but, and he told me, and we waited and got it more fit, but it's like, man, that sucked. That sucked. I mean, it's because you knew what by it didn't even suck because it was like a story that seems so stupid and so little to like to say, but it just, you knew what he meant, right? Like you don't FaceTime someone after those big wins because you just kind of like them or you just kind of look up to them. Like he mattered so much and still does in that locker room. Like one of my favorite parts of the season was seeing former teammates, be it Jamal Woods, I think Kendall Smith and Kaylon Tolson, to run out with that 97 strong flag. Like some of those, and I know it's still recent, I guess, but like some of those things kind of peter off a little bit over time. And when you see it and you see how much it matters, and you have those firsthand experiences in the locker room kind of trickle through the next group of players, like maybe I'm just romanticizing it at this point, but you just don't feel like that flag is going to go away. Like you just feel like that's going to be part of what we see. And it's a testament to Bobby. And you and I covered Bobby, you longer than me. I know you covered him as a recruit. And it's everything everybody said. You're like, yeah, that's it. Like, but initially I remember talking to him. It's like, I can't really crack this guy. And like,
He was tough in interviews. Yeah.
yeah. And like, I don't really know him. And to be fair, he doesn't really know me. So what's going on here? And then when you get talking to him and you know him, like everything everybody said about him was true. So that was a tough one, man. That really, and I remember talking to Josh Whitman at Big Ten Media Days, which was not long after it happened. And you just saw his eyes well. And like, that wasn't fake. That wasn't because cameras were on. It's because it's the first time he talked about this guy. And I still think Lovey's brightest moment as a coach was his response to Bobby's accident in the summer and staying in his hospital room and being such a big part of Bobby's recovery. It's you saw who Lovey was as a person. Like as much as we have to be critical of the job he did on the football field, and that's fair, and that comes with this gig. You saw his like Bobby Roundtree couldn't help, like he wasn't going to help him win football games anymore. But Lovey didn't just move along, right? And I think that's what sticks out to me so much. And you knew how much he meant. So just trying to process all of that in Florida and looking at it like, oh my gosh, like this is unbelievable. And then obviously you could just hear kind of the hurt in his teammates. And we didn't really want to have to ask them about it, right? Like no one wants to continue to ask, but it's part of the job, and they understood that.
It's part of like getting his legacy out there too, right? Like I think they understood that, and that's what our job was to say who this person was and who he meant to people. And he certainly meant a lot to people. And it's tragic when anyone that young, and it adds to it that this kid was going to play in the NFL. Like he was that good. Like he was probably the best recruiting story Lovie Smith had, because of, he had some offers, but he wasn't ranked that high, but they fought for him. And again, another call when I was at Mary Ann's for signing day, Derek McGee called me and said, we're getting him. And it was a huge moment. Like they thought that was a huge win. And his first 2 years, like his freshman year, he looked like he was belonged as a freshman. That doesn't happen that many times as a defensive end. And then his sophomore year, he looked like he was a star, and they thought this is a kid that could go early. And then what happened in the spring happened.
And he carried himself like a star too. And I don't mean that like an arrogant way. I just mean that in the sense of like, he knew he was good, and you have to know you're good if you're good, or you know what good is it, I suppose. But he just kind of had everybody around his finger a little bit in a really good way. And I think I got covering his sophomore year, and you just noticed it immediately, right? Like, oh, this is the guy who's kind of like who leads this thing, and you learned it real, at least defensively, and you learned it really quick, and that's just a testament to who he was. I mean, you mentioned that, I kind of blocked that out. That was a wild, yeah.
All right, let's look ahead to 2022. I think some of the biggest stories will be, how does this basketball season end? Right? Do they win a Big Ten championship? Do they get another banner? And do they make it to the second weekend? Like, I think if you make it to the second weekend, you finish what, top 3 in the Big Ten, Joey, which I would pick them to do. I think people would feel pretty dang good about that Illinois basketball season. And then it goes from there of, all right, how do you survive without Kofi Coburn? Right? Like, what's the program look like after that?
And Trent Frazier
Yeah.
and DeMonte Williams and possibly Jacob Grandison.
Yeah.
And there was some talk before, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, and some talk before the season of Andre Curbelo. We don't know, to be fair, what that looks like long term, but like, yeah, what's this look like? And then what does September, October, November of 2022 look like for this team? And I know I cut you off, but yeah, there's a lot, like a changing of the guard, which happens in college sports. It's why fans are so easily fixated on a team, right? Like, you don't have, I'm a fan of so and so, like that's what part of this is. But this is, I talked about staying power. I don't think that's going away, but this is really going to test how much staying power there is and what that staying power looks like. And we know the class of 2022 and who's in there with Jaden Epps and Ty Rodgers and Sincere Harris, but this is a pretty significant changing of the guard. We saw it in Iowa City last year, right? And I think you're going to see a little bit that seems to me like a pretty reasonable, apples to apples comparison.
Oh, yeah, it's a really good comp. And I think what could make that Iowa program great is make an NCAA tournament within your down year, your rebuilding year. That would be a heck of a thing for Illinois, right? Like, Michigan State has done this time after time after time. Michigan has done this time after time over the last decade through 2 coaches now, of how do you rebuild? And the transfer portal certainly can help that or hurt that. That's what's interesting about this. And then for Illinois football, it's clearly they're going through this right now. This is the roster reset. It's looking different than Lovie Smith because he's going with transfers. You can go with more transfers now, but they also didn't go all in on transfers. So how much can they develop? How much can they improve the offense despite losing this many offensive linemen, potentially Daniel Barker as well? Defensively, you got some really good pieces, but you also lose some really good pieces, especially on the edge, on the interior with Roderick Perry, and then Kirby Joseph going to the NFL. So while Devin Witherspoon, Sidney Brown, Keith Randolph, Johnny Newton, the linebackers are pretty good players. There's a lot to replace there, and got to mention the lads, the specialists. You're losing them as well. So how well can Brett Bielema keep this team competitive after a huge roster reset and limited amount of transfer additions they're going to make because of all the prep additions they're making?
Yeah, that's. And by the way, you go to Michigan, you play Michigan State, and you go to Penn State. So
I think going to Penn State's not scary anymore, Joe.
Well, all right. I think you go to Michigan and host Michigan State. It may well be the other way around.
Yeah, go to Ann Arbor, host Michigan State.
Hey, I guess we're going to the Big House. That'll be fun to see. But
it's very big.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Yeah, man, that is how does Brett do this? Because we talked about it with Lovey's tenure, and now we're going to have to see it with Brett. Is like, how do you balance that? And I think we saw how Brett's going to balance that with 22 prep and 21 and a half Isaiah Adams and JUCO. I think we saw the balance, right? And it's this foundation is what's going to be long term for us. And there's some significant holes to fill. But there's also, especially defensively, there's a lot coming back, at least in the 2 deep. You get a little thin at some positions. Looking at interior defensive line behind Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph, and we know they got the Northwestern transfer. Is it Tara Edwards? Is that right?
Yeah, Tara
Hey, so we know those things are happening. We think, but there's a lot to replace, and you're replacing who I had was the defensive MVP in Owen Carney, and who you had was the defensive MVP in Kirby Joseph, and those are tough things to do. And again, if you're a fan and you're looking into this, at what point you've got no reason to not trust Ryan Walters at this point, right? Like, I mean, that's kind of your saving grace right now. Is, well, that dude's your defensive coordinator, and he does a pretty good job with safeties. And then you look around, and I think there's reason to be impressed with that defensive coaching staff. Offensively, though, man, especially if Daniel Barker stays in the draft, I think it's probably leaning towards that way. I don't know that the door is completely shut, but I think that's probably fair to say it's leaning in that direction. You're gonna have to. You still got Luke Ford. I think you and I both like what they have in Tip Ryman. Then you're bringing in Owen Anderson and Henry Boyer, and what are you going to get out of them? What are you going to need out of them early? But dude, this offensive line has been like the stabilizing force of a whole program that is needed a stabilizing force. It was always like, Badarian Lowe will be your left tackle, Alex Palczewski will be your right tackle, or in this case, right guard, towards the back end of this year, and Doug Kramer's up the middle, and everything else is gravy, right? Because you've got those three at that position. And obviously Kendrick Green was as good as they come, and they did a good job of replacing the other guard spot. But man, when you want to do what Brett Bielema wants to do, and that's be successful in running the football and winning in the trenches. And now you got to replace 4 of your 5. And we both really like Julian Pearl, but he doesn't play all 5 spots at the same time. So it's a big one. That's a really big one. And, you got to make sure you hit on Tommy DeVito too. You got to make sure that guy can give you the production that you need and continue to be a bridge as you get closer to a guy that they like a lot in Donovan Leary. And we don't know how long that's going to be. At least a year. We'll see beyond that. But there's a lot of questions offensively. And I still think 4-8 with the schedule, you probably say like, all right.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to even predict because of so many holes left to fill, right? And then we haven't even seen them. Like, I think Tommy DeVito can be better than what Brandon Peters was last year, but Brandon Peters was pretty good the last 4 games, right? You look at the last 4 games, like, man, if you would have had that the entire season, you'd have a really good team. But also Tommy DeVito, his issues at Syracuse were mostly they couldn't protect him. Like, he had some good receivers, but his defense was awful and they couldn't protect him. I expect his defense will be better. I expect his run game with Chase Brown to still be pretty good, and Josh McCray, and adding a couple of really good freshmen. I think Isaiah Williams is a good target. Probably need another one. Yeah, you probably need another one with Deuce Spann leaving, who had some talent. We had a bunch of freshmen, but I'm not counting on those guys right away. Luke Ford and Tip Ryman can be a solid duo at tight end. Might need to add another one there. So that's where it's really hard to predict this. But yeah, I think on paper, the schedule gets tougher in the Big Ten. The thing is, I think your non-conference with Virginia and Wyoming losing so many players could help you. And both those games are at home. Chattanooga is a win. And then it's the Big Ten West, Joey. You got a chance. Like, the Big Ten West gives you so many opportunities because outside of Wisconsin and Iowa, none of those teams, and I don't even know if those teams terrify me, but they're just better, right? They're better than you. Those other teams are going to give you a chance because Purdue's not head and shoulders above you, and they're losing their 2 best players. Minnesota's been pretty good, but they're losing a bunch of linemen. So Nebraska's still not good, and they're going to this, make or break year for Scott Frost. So it just feels like there's opportunities there in the Big Ten West. It's just you have as many questions answered as anybody in that division.
Yeah, and again, if you're a fan, my advice, which is unsolicited as it comes, would trust what you've seen with how Brett approaches the process, right? Like, I know there's so much, like, it's kind of a running joke in sports, like, listen, you got to trust the process because Philadelphia said it in basketball until you couldn't hear anything else anymore. But you do have to look at the bone and just see how Brett wants to get to where he wants to be. And
yeah, you kind of always understood this was going to be the tougher year than
right,
one, yeah. Probably, at least from a roster construction standpoint. And that, like, this year, like, you don't want to go 2-10, right? Like, that would be a huge setback, right? And then all of a sudden you're wondering about this season shouldn't determine the Brett Bielema era, right? If they go 4-8, or if they even go 6-6, but it's like, you just want to continue to be competitive. And you want to continue to win games that are winnable games. And they still have those on the schedule. It's just, the East crossovers get tougher, but you lost to Rutgers this year when you thought that one was winnable. You lost to Maryland when you thought that year was winnable. So maybe the East crossovers, you went 1-2 last year. If you go 1-2 this year, you'd be pretty happy.
Absolutely, man. It's you knew it was going to be like this. And I think you're going to run into, look, with the way, I don't think you're going to see it this year, but with the way Brett's built this staff, every year you're going to have an off-season question, at least in terms of coaching staff, right? Like, if you think Ryan Walters is going to be here forever, do I have some news for you. I think you could say that about a lot of these. There are a handful of these coaches. So I don't think that's this year, but like, there's always going to be that question. But that's what you want as a program, right? Who's going to go early? What coaches are going to get poached? Like, that's how you know things are going well. But yeah, I do think it's not make or break, but you don't want to lose. I don't want to say what little momentum. I think there's more momentum than a little that was built after this year. But you don't want to feel like you've taken a step back. And was that in the record? Is it in how many blowout losses? And it still feels so stupid to me that we're like quantifying a season by that. But like, you have to.
No, I think it's, how do you look, right? Do you look like a Big Ten West competitor, and how are you recruiting? I think that's going to be really important, is to see if they take another step up in recruiting. Do you get some 4-star prospects, which they were the only Big Ten team that didn't this year? Do you continue? You don't need to get 10 in-state kids again, but are you continuing to recruit the state well and land some of the Power 5 kids in the state? I think all of that's important. Like, you're right. This is part of the process, and you don't want to take a step backwards, because then all of a sudden things get iffy, right? Even going into year 3, you just want to continue the progress, and it might not all show itself in the win-loss column, but maybe it does. Maybe it does. Maybe we're shortchanging it, and we should have higher expectations. But if Illinois is in a bowl game in 2022, I think Brett Bielema has done one hell of a job.
Are you doing a Derek Piper and riding your bike to the bowl destination?
No, I'm not doing that. I don't think it's that ridiculous. Like, the
no, I don't either.
Over-under is probably going to be 3.5 or 4.5 again, right? Like, 3.5 last year felt way too low for me, and I felt iffy about that, right? As you're sitting at 2-5 going into Penn State, it ended up being way too low. I would expect it to come out at 3.5, given the Big Ten and given everything that they're losing. But if they got to like 5 and 7, to me, sounds about right. Like, if they make the additions they need to make, and I think that would show that Brett Bielema is starting to compete, right? And that Illinois can stack together some competitive seasons. And then it's about, can you take that big step up? Because look at Kirk Ferentz, look at Barry Alvarez at Wisconsin. Those guys took them 2 years, and all of a sudden year 3, year 4, that's when they took the huge steps up.
Well, if you're a development program, you need that time to develop your guys. And I think that is, and then once they're developed, you don't need that time because you're not relying. I mean, it's just, you got to start the cycle somewhere. We think it's with this current freshman class. Obviously, you and I like some of the last minute additions, especially from the 21 class with McCray and DJ Johnson. But yeah, you got to do that, man. And we'll see. Maybe it doesn't happen, but the good point on the non-con, like that can really, I mean, springboards are a big deal, right? And that could really springboard into something quickly. Non-revenue stuff, I can't wait to see what Olivia Howell does this year. I just can't wait. Like, dude, she's really, really, really good.
She's contend for a national championship, right?
Yes, and at a venue in Champaign at Demersion Park, that's really nice. Go watch her, dude. She's really fun, and she's really good. And Mike Small is going to do Mike Small things. You did a really nice story on Pearson Hunt and Ho Hum, another number one. Pearson Hunt's up in that category, and so Mike Small does, man. It's non-revenue is actually really, really cooking for Illinois in a lot of respects.
It'll be interesting to see what baseball does this year with a full season. Softball, Tyler Perry makes the tournament more than not, which wasn't the case at the end of the Terry Sullivan era. So will be fun to have spring sports just in full gear coming up. But yeah, I think we covered it all, Joey. It was a crazy year. It was a better year for me, I think, for us in 2021 than it was in 2020. I do believe for all these student athletes and coaches as well. So hopefully 2022 gets a little bit better as well, because these have been tough years, man. But there were some great moments in this one, and a lot more just moments of sports actually in this season. So, any final thoughts as we say goodbye to the year 2021?
Yeah, it just felt good to be back. I know these last few weeks have really sucked, and I'm trying to not let that cloud into what has been a more normal year. It just felt good to, unfortunately, say it, like, let your guard down a little bit and enjoy sports for what they are, because they're really
Yeah,
fun.
and having the Orange Crush behind us again, like it's such a better, like, that was so weird. I never got used to that. And even when we went to Indianapolis and there was only 6,000 fans in this like 80,000 seat place, it felt so big. Like, it felt so great to just have these people back in the stands and to feel like what college athletics is supposed to feel like again. All right, Joey Wagner, thank you, buddy. Great stuff as always. We'll have our year in review list continuing as we go forward. Joey's also doing a list of the top 10 stories for 2022. So we got you covered there. But check out everything at IlliniInquirer.com. Thanks for listening to the Illini Inquirer podcast. Give us a follow, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast, rate us and review us as well. For Joey Wagner, I'm Jeremy Werner. Everybody take care, and we'll talk to you next time on the Illini Inquirer podcast.